Hello, this is Michael Silva. In this episode, we are going to talk about how to submit invoices and how to collect payments from clients. An invoice is a document that the consultant provides to the client to request payment for the consulting services provided. Because most of your invoices will likely be similar, it is recommended that you start out by creating an invoice template. This would be a blank form that can be filled out when it comes time to send out an invoice. This will keep you from having to create a new invoice from scratch every time. Let's review a typical invoice template. The invoice template should include basic information such as your company name, address, and logo. It is also suggested that you include your telephone number and federal tax ID number on your invoice template. The template should provide blank spaces called data fields where specific details about the invoice can be entered. These would include the invoice number, the invoice date, the invoice terms, purchase order number, the client billing address, project name, and a place to enter the services provided and the fees that you're charging, as well as a place to itemize any reimbursable expenses that were incurred on behalf of the project. The invoice template should also include a place for any advance payments made, such as retainer payments, as well as show the invoice total, the tax, if any, and the balance due by the client. Invoice templates can be created using your accounting software or can be done using a program such as Microsoft Word or Excel. The advantage of using accounting software is that many of the data fields, such as client name and address, date, and purchase order number, can be selected from a drop-down menu if this information has previously been entered in the accounting system. This eliminates the need to enter it manually. The other advantage is that once the invoice is created, all information is automatically entered into your accounting system. The disadvantage of using an invoice template within your accounting software is that most software has limited options in terms of actual layout, and you more or less have to work with what the software offers. The advantage of using a program such as Microsoft Word or Excel is that you have almost unlimited flexibility in the way that the invoice layout can be designed. However, the downside is that most data must be entered manually when you create the invoice and then again entered again manually when you record the invoice in your accounting software. Invoices for projects lasting less than a month are typically invoiced at the end of the project. If the project was performed on an hourly fee plus expenses basis, the client would be billed for the total hours of services provided plus reimbursable expenses less the amount of the retainer payment. Here's an example of an invoice for an hourly fee plus expenses project. Invoice number. This is a number that uniquely identifies each invoice. In most cases, consultants will number their invoices sequentially. In some cases, they will include a prefix that identifies the year. For an example, an invoice created in 2024 would start with the numbers 24. Invoice date. This would be the date that the invoice was created and sent to the client. Terms. This specifies the amount of time that the client has to pay the invoice. These terms would be identical to what was agreed upon within the proposal or contract that the client signed when authorizing the project. In this case, the terms are net 30, meaning that the client has 30 days to pay the invoice in full. Purchase order number. If you were issued a purchase order for the project, this would be the purchase order number that was assigned to you. It is very important that a correct purchase order number be entered. Otherwise, the invoice will very likely be rejected. Project name. This would be a short name that describes the project. Billing address. This is where the invoice should be sent. Please note that the billing address may be different than the client's regular address. There may also be a requirement to direct the invoice to the attention of a specific person or department, such as Attention Accounts Payable. The exact billing address and billing procedures are usually spelled out on the client's purchase order, so be sure to read carefully when preparing an invoice. Professional fees. This is where you charge for the consulting services that you provided to the client. Within this section, provide a brief description of the services provided and the location where they were performed. Because this is an hourly invoice, indicate the hours being billed for and your hourly rate. In this case, the client is being billed for 40 hours at $300 an hour, resulting in a total fee of $12,000. It is customary to include a daily breakdown of the hours worked and the tasks performed each day. This is normally done on a separate timesheet that is attached to the invoice, but for very small projects, say those involving only a few hours, this can be done on the invoice itself. Reimbursable expenses. This is where you charge the client for any expenses that you incurred when performing the project. If you only have a small number of expenses, these can be listed on the invoice itself as shown here. If you have a large number of expenses, you will likely want to itemize them on a separate voucher that is attached to the invoice and simply include the total amount of expenses here. In this case, the total expenses were $1,590. Most clients will request copies of expense receipts. These should be attached to the invoice. Payments. This is where you show previous payments that were made towards this invoice. In this case, the client made an advance retainer payment of $3,000. Because this is the final invoice for this project, it would be deducted from the invoice total now. For projects that go on for many months, the retainer payment would be deducted from the very last invoice. Amounts being deducted are shown using either a minus sign or by enclosing the amount within parentheses as shown here. Invoice total. To arrive at the invoice total, the professional fees of $12,000 are added to the $1,590 in expenses, and the $3,000 retainer payment is deducted from this amount. Tax, if any, is added to arrive at the balance due. In this case, there is no tax, so the total balance due is $10,590. In some cases, you'll be charging the client on a fixed fee basis rather than on an hourly basis. Here is a sample invoice for a fixed fee plus expenses project. On this invoice, everything is identical to the hourly invoice that we just discussed, except the way that the professional fees are calculated. Because this is a fixed fee project, we only need to indicate the total amount of the fixed fee, which in this case is $12,000. There is no need to specify the hours worked or provide your hourly rate when submitting an invoice for a fixed fee project. Sometimes a consulting project may go on for several months. In these cases, it is customary for the security consultant to bill for services on a monthly basis rather than waiting for the project to be 100% complete before getting paid. This allows the consultant to receive income each month to avoid a cash flow crunch and assures that the client will pay their bills before getting too far into the project. Bills submitted on a monthly basis are called progress billings because they are made progressively as the project goes along. Submitting progress billings for hourly plus expenses projects is relatively easy. To do this, you simply send the client an invoice each month using the hourly plus expenses invoicing method that was previously described. Submitting progress billings for fixed fee projects is a little more complicated. When a fixed fee project extends over several months, the estimated percentage of completion is figured at the end of each month. From this percentage, the amount the consultant is owed is determined, and any amounts paid in any previous progress invoices is deducted. For example, let's say that a project has a fixed fee amount of $35,000. At the end of this first month, the project is 25% complete, so the consultant is due $8,750. This is 25% of $35,000. A progress invoice for this amount, plus any expenses incurred in the first month, is submitted to the client. Here's an example of an invoice for the first month that you are submitting a progress billing. This invoice was created on January 3rd, 2025, and covers services provided through December 31st, 2024. As of this date, the project was 25% complete. To calculate the amount of fee due, you would simply take the fixed fee amount of $35,000 that was agreed to by the client times the percentage of completion, which in this case is 25%. This would give you a figure of $8,750. This is the amount of fee you are presently due. To this, you would add any reimbursable expenses that you incurred on behalf of the client during the month. These two figures would be added together to arrive at the amount that was due for this monthly invoice. On the second month, you would invoice the client in a similar manner. The date of this invoice is February 3rd, 2025. As of this date, the project is now 50% complete. So you would calculate the amount of the fee that has been earned to date by taking $35,000, the fixed fee, times the 50% completion rate. This means that you have earned $17,500 as of this date. From this amount, you would deduct the previous month's payment. This is the $8,750 that was billed in January. So the amount that would be due this month in terms of fees would be $8,750 again. To this amount, you would add the expenses that you incurred during this month to the fee amount to arrive at the $9,334.75 total that was due for this monthly progress billing. We have finally completed the project and are ready to submit our final invoice. This invoice would indicate that the project is now 100% complete. To arrive at the final amount due, we would take the fixed fee amount of $35,000 and deduct from it the two payments that were received previously. This would include the payment made in January for $8,750 and the payment made in February of $8,750 to arrive at the final amount of consulting fees due. To this amount, we would add any final reimbursable expenses that were incurred during the previous month. In this case, those expenses totaled up to $894.75. Because this is a final invoice, we will now get around to finally deducting the retainer payment that the client made to us at the start of the project. So to arrive at the total, we would take the amount of fees due, the $17,500, add to it the expenses due, the $894.75, and from this amount, deduct the $10,000 that was given to us as a retainer payment. This would give a final balance due of $8,394.75. Collecting payment. Collecting payments promptly from clients is essential, particularly when you are just starting out and you need to receive that client's check to pay your bills. Here are a few tips to help you get paid more promptly. Number 1, make sure that the clients that you work with are creditworthy. Trust your gut feelings and always ask for a retainer payment when in doubt. Number 2, never start work until you have received a signed proposal or contract, despite pleas from the client that you get started while the paperwork is being processed. If the work is so important that you must start immediately, it should be important enough that the client can find a way to expedite the paperwork. Number 3, be sure that the person requesting your services has the authority to make purchasing decisions. Sometimes an overzealous employee at a company may ask for services when they have no authority to do so. Asking for a retainer payment in advance is usually one way to make sure that this doesn't happen. Checks usually can't be written until the proper authorizations are in place. Number 4, make sure that you have fully complied with all the paperwork requirements of the client, including requests to submit a Form W-9 or Certificate of Insurance. Number 5, be sure to carefully read all of the client's requirements for invoice submission and make sure that you have fully complied with all of them. Number 6, before submitting an invoice, particularly to a first-time client, call and ask if they are happy with the work performed. If so, tell a client that you will be submitting your invoice and ask them to call if there are any issues with it. Number 7, if the client has strict policies on reimbursable expenses, consider submitting 2 separate invoices, one for your consulting fee and another one for your expenses. I have seen $20,000 invoices held up because of a dispute about a $20 expense on a hotel bill. Number 8, if an invoice is more than a few days past due, immediately call your client to find out what's going on. Don't be shy about attempting to collect what's owed to you. You have kept your commitment to them, and you have a right to insist that they keep their commitments to you. Number 9, don't start new work for clients who haven't promptly paid past invoices and still owe you money. For ongoing projects, consider pausing work on the project if the client is not paying you according to the agreed upon terms.